Here, even the rocks are alive. Brittle thickets of staghorn coral and undulating sea whips are part of this unearthly cast of characters. Here, where many animals look like plants, surprises await at every turn. There are female fish that begin their lives as males, and snails that are both male and female at once. There are colors that advertise and colors that conceal. Brilliant colors that seem to exist simply to dazzle the eye. This is the enchanted realm of the Great Barrier Reef, stretching for more than 1,200 miles along Australia's eastern coast. The largest community of living organisms on Earth. It is a lush island of life in an otherwise barren tropical sea. Life here runs on a strict solar clock. Its timekeeper is light, its driving force, the need to reproduce, the need to eat, and to avoid being eaten. Even the living structure of the reef, made entirely from coral, perpetuates itself on cues from this clock, in a silent dance of life that occurs but once a year. As the first rays of the rising sun filter through the reef, groupers and other hunters of the twilight hours stretch languidly and stop their prowling as they ease into comfortable daytime hiding places. Members of the daylight shift cautiously prepare to abandon their nighttime shelters. The lingering twilight still offers an advantage to predators, whose tactics work best in dim light. One of these, a lionfish, glides along the reef, as if secure in the knowledge that venomous spines make it an unpleasant target for others. Searching for small fish in shadowy places, it uses fan-like fins to herd unwary quarry into a tight corner. Then, a lightning-fast gulp, and the prey disappears. Now and then, some small fish, like this baby pufferfish, seem to play with fire, nipping at the fins of the lionfish. But puffers have a secret weapon. Snapped up by the lionfish, it swells into a prickly ball. The puffer is quickly spit out. This lionfish won't eat again until dusk. His slow-paced hunting style works best in dim light, when his prey can't see very well. But lionfish, and all reef creatures, ultimately depend on the reef's most intriguing and important animals, the corals themselves. Corals don't just live on the reef, they build it, inch by inch, laying down limestone that forms the canyons, terraces, and towers of an undersea metropolis. More than 500 species of coral form the Great Barrier Reef, and they grow in an incredible variety of shapes. Tabletop and staghorn corals can extend their branches as much as 6 inches each year. Massive species like this brain coral may take a decade to reach the size of a baseball, but can live for centuries. Corals built this enormous three-dimensional labyrinth. Corals are considered animals, but they're not typical animals in any way. What we identify as a single coral is really a colony, each comprised of hundreds or thousands of tiny individuals called polyps. These polyp communities feed at night. Arms outstretched, they catch and strain food from water moving past them. But as the sun rises, polyps draw back into the protection of their limestone skeletons. For the rest of the day, these hard corals act less like animals than like plants, protecting their delicate tissues from the jaws of enemies yet unseen. They spend the daylight hours capturing solar energy with the help of single-celled algae living in their tissues. The algae also enable their hosts to secrete the limestone that forms the structure of the reef. This intimate partnership helps make possible the incredible density of life here. There are some types of corals that manage to live without partners. Able to absorb nutrients directly from seawater, they thrive where hard corals would perish. Without the help of algae, these corals can't make limestone skeletons, so they don't add to the structure of the reef. Though they look fragile, they are actually tough and leathery. Just after sunrise, as coral polyps withdraw, all is quiet on the reef. For about 20 minutes, the reef is eerily deserted. The sun rises higher. Then suddenly, the reef swarms with life. Fish pour out of reef caves and crevices to feed through the daylight hours. Their eyes, finely tuned for sharp color vision, see as well or better than our own. Bright colors advertise their identity, sex, readiness to mate, and willingness to fight. There are hundreds of species, each of which has its own way of surviving on the reef. This tiny black and blue striped fish is called a cleaner wrasse, for obvious reasons. It spends its life cleaning other larger fish, searching for parasites, dead skin, and loose scales, all of which it eats. While doing this, the cleaner wrasse uses a small pair of fins beneath its gills to tickle the larger fish. Research shows that this tactile stimulation keeps clients coming back for more. Each cleaner wrasse has its own territory called a cleaning station. Other fish learn where these stations are and come calling, including large predators. Groupers this size could easily swallow the cleaner fish whole, but they almost never do. In fact, when they open their mouths, it's usually to invite the wrasse inside. There, doctor becomes dentist, inspecting teeth, mouth, gills, and other tender spots that harbor annoying parasites. Even ill-tempered moray eels seem eager for the cleaner's attention. Morays are normally reclusive by day, preferring to keep most of their body hidden in a coral tunnel. At night, they hunt by smell and taste. Different species of moray range from a few inches in length to the size of a full-grown cow. Though they rarely attack divers unless provoked, their backward-pointing teeth make escaping from their bite difficult and painful. The morning rush hour is in full swing as fish migrate between resting and feeding areas. These fish are plant eaters, consuming algae that would otherwise carpet the reef surface. Food can be so scarce that this parrotfish tries to feed on the waste of others, recycling food that has been collected but not quite digested. Some fish take time to get acquainted. Others are all business. This feisty damselfish is constantly fighting, mainly to defend its turf in the crowded reef metropolis. Staking out a claim on the reef surface, the damsel chases off all plant eaters. Its territory is soon covered by a thick layer of algae, which shelters the tiny animals on which damsels actually feed. Damsels are quite aggressive for their size, willing to square off against intruders many times larger. They even chase off a full-grown surgeonfish armed with razor-sharp spines to protect the algae farm. The clownfish also fiercely guards its home, which happens to be the body of an animal called a sea anemone. This may be the most famous partnership on the reef. Anemone tentacles are armed with stinging cells that can be deadly to fish. But clownfish know instinctively how to protect themselves. From an early age, they rub against the anemone's body, mixing the host's mucus coat with their own. As a result, the anemone's tentacles treat the clownfish as part of itself, rather than as a separate animal to be stung. It's not only the clownfish that benefit from this association, finding shelter from fish-eating predators. But we now know the anemone gains as well. Like damselfish, these clownfish are willing to take on animals many times their size, and would not hesitate to attack if their host was threatened. But otherwise, clownfish never venture far from their anemone homes. As the sun rises higher, all is calm a few meters beneath the surface. But near the surface, waves batter the reef. The action of the water carves deep channels in the face of the reef. Beyond the breaking waves, the water is shallow and calm. As the tide ebbs, corals are exposed to air. Water rushes past them out to sea. These tidal currents flowing across the reef carry precious food in the form of plankton and a host of floating particles. Along the way, countless hungry mouths are waiting. What looks like a pair of feather dusters are actually the gills of worms, whose bodies are hidden within the reef. The plumes enable the worm to breathe and strain food particles from the water at the same time. Worms like these carpet many parts of the reef. Their gills vary in shape and color, but all serve the same essential purpose. Though these delicate structures may seem vulnerable to passing fish, they can withdraw in an instant if a shadow passes overhead. Everywhere on the reef, hungry arms comb through the water and unfurl to form living nets. Sea lilies, whose ancestors shared the earth with dinosaurs, perch in the current to snag their meals. They strain plankton and other food particles from the water with incredible efficiency. More than 80% of the plankton that washes onto a reef never makes it downstream. The great whale shark, one of the sea's largest inhabitants, feeds on some of the smallest. These filter-feeding behemoths pump enough water through their gills every day to fill 5,000 swimming pools. Cruising with their mouths open, they strain enough plankton from the water to feed their massive bulk, which can reach 12 tons. The manta ray is another huge filter feeder. Though their wingspan can reach up to 7 meters, they too feed on tiny plankton. Twin scoops framing their mouth funnel water into bulging gullets. Solitary creatures, they remain on the fringe of the reef, rarely venturing inside. Meanwhile, on the hundreds of sandy coral islands that line the reef, the sun is high and the tide is low. Herons and other shorebirds eagerly stalk prey trapped in shallow tidal pools. A midday low tide can mean trouble here, for though hard corals thrive on solar energy when submerged, exposure to drying air and intense tropical sun can be deadly. Too much exposure kills corals, but many can survive brief periods by producing a thick layer of mucus, which later serves as yet another source of food for reef animals. High above the reef, frigate birds and gannets hunt for fish that they scoop from the water or steal from each other. Below wait their hungry chicks. Parents sit on their young, not to keep them warm, but to shelter them from the blazing sun. By hunting at sea and bringing food home, seabirds help fertilize the grasses and shrubs where they nest. Back underwater, midday and low tide, things are quiet on the reef. Divers drop in for a visit. Their destination today is a small wreck claimed by the reef over a century ago. Over the years, floating and swimming larvae of corals, sponges, and worms settled on every available hard surface. In time, they grew into a miniature reef. Its shape still testifies to human handiwork, but its carpet of life is now home to scores of reef species. It offers daytime shade to schools of fish and shelter to sea snakes. Sea turtles also find plenty of food here. Their powerful jaws make short work of even the toughest shells. Feeding slowly and methodically, they seem totally unconcerned about the divers. the open water around the wreck, giant rays glide like birds in slow-motion flight. Back on the reef, swarms of plankton-feeding fish scour the water for food. Among the largest daytime fish are parrotfish, which often roam the reef in large schools. Using powerful beaks and jaws, they spend most of the day grazing on what looks like dead coral. They are after the algae that grow on and in this porous limestone. Every day, they process many times their body weight in coral rubble, keeping the reef surface free of excess algae and returning limestone as finely pulverized sand. The sandy rubble at the base of reefs looks barren to humans, but is a fertile feeding ground for reef fish. This wrasse leaves no stone unturned in its search for worms and other delicacies. Nearby, goatfish cruise hungrily. Their search for food is guided by pairs of chin barbels, which may look like whiskers but are covered with taste buds. They probe the sand, detecting buried prey. So successful are goatfish in finding food that they rarely hunt alone. Wherever they go, they are followed by freeloaders, eager to snatch any small animals scared up by the goatfish during their search. Less discriminating in its tastes, this sea cucumber inches along the bottom, swallowing a steady stream of sand and organic debris. Digesting what he can, he expels the rest. This whirlwind of activity is a school of marine catfish. Finding safety in numbers, they swarm along the sandy bottom in long, tumbling columns. Those in the middle are safest, but least likely to snag a meal. Those at the edge are more exposed and more successful in foraging. Other species shun crowds. These butterfly fish hunt as they live, in mated pairs, which stay together for life. Later in the afternoon, the shyest sand dwellers peer cautiously from their burrows. These are the elusive garden eels. Gathering in communities of up to 300, each digs a private meter-deep burrow with its tail. They use sharp eyesight to pluck food from the current without leaving their burrows. If threatened, they can disappear in an instant. Where coral sand meets rubble lives the reef's true odd couple, the industrious blind shrimp and the watchful goby. The shrimp seems forever to be excavating the burrow they share, while keeping its long antennae in nearly constant contact with the goby. Like a guard dog, the goby eyes the surroundings for enemies, whose presence it signals with a flick of its tail. Other species of goby have more typical domestic arrangements. They live in mated pairs, share housekeeping chores, and stay together for life. As afternoon fades into early evening, lengthening shadows signal approaching danger for daytime fish. Plankton feeders become less bold and hug the reef more closely. The reason for their unease is soon obvious, as schools of predators gather and cruise along the reef. Among the first to appear are jacks and small barracuda. None of them are hunting yet. They school tightly, maintaining formation. Moving and turning together. Their prey also stick together. The eyes of many see more than the eyes of a few. This ability to school is due to a remarkable sixth sense located on the sides of their bodies. It enables them to detect and respond to minute vibrations made by the movements of fish nearby. While the maelstrom of flashing bodies confuses adversaries, members of the school can react instantly as one. As twilight approaches, the reef takes on a heightened tension. Even large daytime fish gather together and move cautiously. Predators circle, ever bolder, ever closer. Sharks of several kinds rise from the deep. While others become more active. The hunting begins. Soon another predator joins the fray. Using their own school to herd prey into corners, jacks dash through the panicked throng. Ambush hunters like this small grouper benefit from the confusion. As prey are forced close to the reef by jacks, they become disoriented and easy targets for well-aimed jaws. Sensing danger from a distance, the flying gurnard spreads huge wing-like fins, making itself look as large as possible as it swims away. A razor wrasse dives for cover at the first hint of trouble. Lacking a true burrow, it knows where sand is soft. Even a harmless shrimp-eating shark provokes a hasty retreat. All over the reef, daytime fish stick closer to home and are ever more ready to duck for cover. As light dims further, their sharp daytime eyes no longer function well. They are at a disadvantage, and they know it. That instinctive knowledge is vital. Fish who stray too far are eaten. Everyone seems to be heading for cover now. These shrimp fish usually seek shelter among the spines of sea urchins. But in a pinch, any vertical structure, like these sea whips, will do. The day shift is heading for home, but on a reef, commuting at rush hour is dangerous. The only law in effect here now is eat or be eaten, as twilight hunters stalk the reef. In the air above the reef, seabirds return home to roost and to preen. While below, despite the dangers, certain species prepare to risk their lives to mate. Groups of parrotfish gather and form trains along the reef. They aren't oblivious to the ever-present threat of cruising predators, but they risk their lives to give their eggs a chance to escape the daytime horde. Above the reef at sunset, damsels court in pairs and small groups, while parrotfish prepare for an evening of wild abandon. Milling about beneath the surface, they suddenly shoot upward, releasing clouds of eggs and sperm in unison. Chemical cues help the sperm find eggs in the swirling water. Below, on the reef itself, this clownfish family seems a model of decorum by contrast. The male guards the eggs, fanning them and keeping them free of debris. A clownfish nest can contain many thousands of eggs at once, and they are well cared for. But the sex lives of these animals are far from ordinary. The largest fish in the group is a female, who began life as a male. Like the consorts that surround her now, she, who was then a he, grew slowly, working his way up in the pecking order of the clan. When the reigning female died, male turned to female and began laying eggs. It's a somewhat unorthodox way of making sure that there will always be at least one male and female present, without requiring either to leave the safety of their anemone home. This female cuttlefish is just as fastidious about protecting her eggs. After placing them carefully, she guards them until they hatch. Shortly after, she will die. But the greatest drama of all is about to unfold. It is nightfall. The moon rises and exerts its own power over the creatures of the reef. A new crop of plankton fills the dark water, and coral polyps come out of hiding to act as animals and feed on the drifting plankton. Once active daytime fish settle down and sleep. This parrotfish has secreted a mucus cocoon that envelops its body. This fragile shroud may help mask its scent from predators who hunt using smell and taste. With the last daytime fish gone, the reef undergoes an amazing transformation as an unearthly crew of nighttime creatures crawls out of their shelters. What daylight exposes, darkness conceals, and what sunshine forbids, shadows allow. Daytime divers never see any of these fascinating animals. Some creatures, like the octopus, which are shy and secretive in daylight, become bold and adventuresome at night. Their patterned skin is filled with sacs called chromatophores that change color on command. They do this for camouflage. A remarkable feat, given that these animals are thought to be completely colorblind. The cuttlefish is also colorblind and camouflaged, but it has sharp vision and quick reflexes which serve it well as a predator. Waves of color wash over its body in the excitement of the hunt. Elsewhere on the nighttime reef, harlequin shrimp manipulate their prey, a starfish. They drag it to their lair, immobilize it by turning it upside down. And spend the next several days devouring it alive from the tips of its arms towards the center. Banded coral shrimp, though active by day, are also out and about at night. They use claws and parts of their mouths to take over the job performed by cleaner wrasses during the day. Delicately feeding themselves, they also use their flexible limbs to keep their bodies free of debris. host of other tiny animals, such as this transparent shrimp, have scarcely been identified because they hide so well and live in out-of-the-way places. This shrimp and its mate are found only in the gills of the giant sea slug called the Spanish dancer. The largest of its kind, it is usually seen crawling along the reef after dark. But when disturbed, it swirls through the water, flapping the brightly colored mantle that gives it its name. Most of its relatives are smaller, but no less fascinating. They have dispensed with the protective shell carried by their terrestrial kin, the snails. Their gills are born naked on their backs, hence the scientific name nudibranch. Lacking shells, they seem defenseless, but that is hardly the case. In place of armor, they carry chemical weapons, usually compounds that taste foul, are poisonous, or both. Often, they acquire and concentrate those poisons from sponges they eat. Their electric colors advertise their toxic cargo. Though rarely seen on the surface of the reef by day, they are common in reef caves and are out in the open at night. Their diversity of color and form is truly extraordinary. Some of them seem too bizarre to be real. The moon is just past full, and so is the tide. In the surf, a female sea turtle appears. She has returned to the very same beach where she hatched years ago. Driven by instincts older than the reef around her, she has come to lay her eggs, depositing them in a hole she digs in dry sand. Used to floating in water, she breathes with difficulty, unaccustomed to supporting her full weight. The sex of her young will be determined by the temperature of the sand. At this time of year, most will be male. Having hidden her brood, she returns wearily to her watery home. As she swims out to sea, humans arrive to search the darkened reef for its nocturnal treasures. Their lights startle a few night wanderers. These divers, though they bide their time inspecting coral caves, have come to witness a once-a-year event. With the moon 5 days past full and the sea warm, the living reef prepares to reproduce itself. In the dead of night, polyps stop feeding and ready themselves to release eggs and sperm. First, one at a time, then in greater and greater numbers. Corals across the reef join in a silent frenzy of mass reproduction. Some polyps cast only sperm into the tropical night. others produce only eggs. Some spew forth eggs and sperm at once. In the water, these fuse to produce larvae that eventually become coral polyps. Some coral species release larvae that have been fertilized inside polyps and are now ready to swim off on their own. However they are produced, the larvae of some species will settle within days and begin new colonies quite close to their parents. Other larvae may swim and drift for months in waves and currents, possibly even founding new reefs far from home. How, when, and why do coral larvae decide to settle? We still don't know. As corals spawn, other animals join in. Sea cucumbers sway in ponderous slow-motion dances, while nudibranchs play their own game. These animals are both male and female at the same time, and act that way. Each plays female to a mate behind, and male to the one in front. And then, sometimes, they switch positions. All around, the water is filled with coral spawn. Sperm follows scent trails to eggs of their own species. Hidden worms release long sections of their bodies that are filled with their eggs and sperm. With luck, currents will carry these clouds far from the reef before the swarms of plankton-feeding fish awake after dawn and eat them. This is how reefs build and expand. This is how new reefs get started. But it is still a struggle to survive. By the light of the next day, hungry fish swarm to feast on a rare treat, a giant slick of congealed coral eggs and sperm. The vast majority of the spawn will not survive. Still, such enormous quantities have been produced that enough survive to perpetuate the life of the reef. Meanwhile, back on the beach, hatchling turtles from an earlier clutch dig out from their sandy nest and scramble madly for the sea. The time they emerge is determined by the temperature of the sand. Sometimes it's during the day, but usually they emerge under cover of darkness to protect them from enemies that stalk them everywhere. The first moments of their journey are the most perilous, as they run a gauntlet of hungry mouths. Only because of their numbers do any reach the relative safety of the surf. And the reef holds its own dangers. The water surface by day is no place for young turtles. Of the few that escape to open water, some will grow to a safe size and will return someday to call the reef home. Much of their life remains a mystery, like the drifting coral spawn. On their survival, the future of the reef depends, and the continuation of a community like no other in this world.
Educators and home viewers can purchase this and many other NOVA programs for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. To order, call 1-800-255-9424.